Hello viewers, welcome to World History Explored. Today we are talking about the history of country, so it should say, a beautiful country called Honduras. In this video, we'll cover the key events and periods that have shaped Honduras from 200 BC to 2020. Honduras was inhabited by many indigenous peoples when the Spanish arrived in the 16th century. The western central part of Honduras was inhabited by the Lencas, the central north coast by the Tol, the area east and west of Trujillo by the Pec or Paya, the Maya, and Sumo. These autonomous groups traded with each other and with other populations as distant as Panama and Mexico. Honduras has ruins of several cities dating from the Mesoamerican pre-classic period that show the pre-Colombian past of the country. Before we go on, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Let's get started. Pre-Columbian era. Around 200 BC, Honduras was home to several indigenous groups, including the Maya, Lenca, and Chorotega. The Maya civilization had a significant presence in western Honduras, building impressive cities like Copan. These ancient societies thrived on agriculture, trade, and craftsmanship. Archaeology has demonstrated that Honduras has a multi-ethnic prehistory. An important part of that prehistory was the Mayan presence around Copan in western Honduras near the Guatemalan border, a major Mayan city that began to flourish around 150 AD, but reached its zenith in the late Classic period, 700 to 850 AD. It has left behind many carved inscriptions and stela. The ancient kingdom, named Supi or Oxwitic, existed from the 5th century to the early 9th century, and had antecedents going back to at least the 2nd century, a period named Predynastic Copan. The Mayan civilization began a marked decline in population in the 9th century, but evidence shows people still living in and around the city until at least 1200. By the time the Spanish came to Honduras, the once great city-state of Copan had been overrun by the jungle, and the surviving Chorti were isolated from their Cholchian linguistic peers to the west. The non-Maya Lencas dominated western Honduras and had several villages in the valleys. The Lenca were the biggest and most well-organized society in terms of military organization by the time of the conquest in the early 16th century. Although most Honduran great urban areas belong to the Mesoamerican cultural area, La Ciudad Blanca is the major exception. It lies on the very fringe of Mesoamerica and is better described in relation to the Istmo-Colombian area. This civilization thrived from 500 AD to 1000 AD and included sophisticated management of the environment in accordance with large urban centers. Despite being outside the Mesoamerican area, studies reveal that the city had Mayan elements, like a ball game, and some pyramidal structures similar to the ones found in western Honduras. Studies in the area showed huge structures in the city, and one had a ceremonial area where they performed rituals to kings and gods. Independence from Spain, 1821. In 1502, Christopher Columbus became the first European to reach Honduras during his 4th voyage. The Spanish began colonizing the region in the 1520s. Establishing towns and subjugating the indigenous population. Honduras became part of the Captaincy General of Guatemala under the control of the Spanish Empire. In the early 19th century, Napoleon's occupation of Russia led to the outbreak of revolts all across Spanish America. In New Spain, all of the fighting by those seeking independence was done in the center of that area from 1810 to 1821. What today is central Mexico. Once the viceroy was defeated in Mexico City in 1821, news of independence was sent to all territories of New Spain, including the intendancies of the former Captaincy of Guatemala. Accepting this as a fact, Honduras joined the other Central American intendancies in a joint declaration of independence from Spain. The public proclamation was done through the Act of Independence in 1821. After the Declaration of Independence, it was the intention of the New Spain Parliament to establish a commonwealth whereby King of Spain Ferdinand VI would also be Emperor of New Spain, and in which both countries were to be governed by separate laws and with their own legislative offices. Should the king refuse the position, the law provided for a member of the House of Bourbon to accede to the New Spain throne. Ferdinand VI did not recognize the Declaration of Independence and said that Spain would not allow any other European prince to take the throne of New Spain. By request of Parliament, the president of the Regency, Agustín de Iturbide, was proclaimed Emperor of New Spain. The Parliament also decided to rename New Spain to Mexico. The First Mexican Empire is the official name given to this monarchical regime from 1821 to 1823. The territory of the Mexican Empire included the continental intendancies and provinces of New Spain proper, including those of the former Captaincy General of Guatemala. Federal Independence period, 1821 to 1838. In 1823, a revolution in Mexico ousted Emperor Agustín de Iturbide, and a new Mexican Congress voted to allow the Central American intendancies to decide their own fate. That year, the United Provinces of Central America was formed of the 5 Central American intendancies: Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica, under General Manuel José Arce. The intendancies took the new name of states. Among the most important figures of the federal era include the first democratically elected president in Honduras, Dionisio de Herrera, a lawyer whose government, begun in 1824, established the first constitution. After him became the presidential period of Gen. Democratic period between 1838 and 1899. In the decades of the 1840s and 1850s, Honduras participated in several failed attempts to restore Central American unity, such as the Confederation of Central America, 1842 to 1845, the Covenant of Guatemala, 1842, the Diet of Sonsonate, 1846, the Diet of Nacaum, 1847, and national representation in Central America, 1849 to 1852. All of them were sabotaged by the conservatives of all Central American countries. Although Honduras eventually adopted the name Republic of Honduras, the unionist ideal never waned, and Honduras was one of the Central American countries that pushed hardest for the policy of regional unity. In 1850, Honduras attempted to build, with foreign assistance, an interoceanic railroad from Trujillo to Tegucigalpa and then on to the Pacific coast. The project stalled due to difficulties in the work, corruption, and other issues, and in 1888 ran out of money when it reached San Pedro Sula, resulting in its growth into the nation's main industrial center and second largest city. Honduras in the 20th century. The rise of U.S. influence in Honduras, 1899 to 1919. In 1899, the banana industry in Honduras was growing rapidly. A peaceful transfer of power from Policarpo Bonilla to General Terencio Sierra marked the first time in decades that a constitutional transition had taken place. By 1902, railroads had been built along the country's Caribbean coast to accommodate the growing banana industry. However, Sierra made efforts to stay in office and refused to step down when a new president was elected in 1902 and was overthrown by Manuel Bonilla in 1903. After toppling Sierra, Manuel Bonilla, a conservative, imprisoned ex-president Policarpo Bonilla, a liberal rival, for 2 years and made other attempts to suppress liberals throughout the country, as they were the only other organized political party. The conservatives were divided into a host of personalist factions and lacked coherent leadership, but Bonilla reorganized the conservatives into a national party. The present-day National Party of Honduras, Partido Nacional de Honduras PNH, traces its origins to his administration. Renewed instability, 1919 to 1924. In 1919, it became obvious that Francisco Bertrand would refuse to allow an open election to choose his successor. This course of action was opposed by the United States and had little popular support in Honduras. The local military commander and governor of Tegucigalpa, General Rafael López Gutiérrez, took the lead in organizing PLK's opposition to Bertrand. Determined to avoid an international conflict, the United States government, after some hesitation, offered to mediate the dispute, hinting to the Honduran president that if he refused the offer, open intervention might follow. The United States landed U.S. Marines on 11 September 1919. Bertrand promptly resigned and left the country. The United States ambassador helped install an interim government headed by Francisco Bogran, who promised to hold free elections. In 1919, for example, the military had spent more than double the amount budgeted for them, accounting for over 57% of all federal expenditure. Young's recommendations for reducing the military budget, however, found little favor with the new López Gutiérrez administration, and the government's financial condition remained a major problem. Restoration of Order, 1925 to 1931. Despite another minor uprising led by General Ferreira in 1925, the banana companies continued to expand. The government's budgetary situation improved, and there was even an increase in labor organizing. On the international front, the Honduran government, after years of negotiations, finally concluded an agreement with the British bondholders to liquidate most of the immense national debt. The bonds were to be redeemed at 20% of face value over a 30-year period. Back interest was forgiven, and new interest accrued only over the last 15 years of this arrangement. Under the terms of this agreement, Honduras at last seemed on the road to fiscal solvency. Tiburcio Carías Andino, 1932 to 1949. Despite growing unrest and severe economic strains, the 1932 presidential elections in Honduras were relatively peaceful and fair. The peaceful transition of power was surprising because the onset of the Depression had led to the overthrow of governments elsewhere throughout Latin America, in nations with much stronger democratic traditions than those of Honduras. After United Fruit bought out Colonial, Sam Zemaray, a strong supporter of the Liberal Party, left the country, and the Liberals were short on cash by the 1932 general election. Mejia Colindres, however, resisted pressure from his own party to manipulate the results to favor the PLK candidate, Angel Zuniga Huete. As a result, the PNH candidate, Carías, won the election by a margin of some 20,000 votes. On 16 November 1932, Carías took office, beginning what was to be the longest period of continuous time in power by any individual in Honduran history. New reform, 1949 to 1954. Once in office, Gulves showed more independence than expected. He continued and expanded some policies of the Carías administration, such as road building and development of coffee exports. By 1953, nearly one-quarter of the government budget was allocated to road construction. Gulves also continued most of the prior administration's fiscal policies, reducing external debt and paying off the last of the British bonds. The fruit companies continued to receive favorable treatment at the hands of the Gulves administration. For example, United Fruit received a highly favorable 25-year contract in 1949. 1955 to 1979. After the general strike in 1954, young military reformists staged a coup in October 1955 that installed a provisional junta. Capital punishment was abolished in 1956, though Honduras had not had an execution since 1940. Constituent Assembly elections in 1957 appointed Ramon Villeda as president, and the Constituent Assembly itself became a national Congress with a 6-year term. The Liberal Party of Honduras, PLH, held power in 1957 to 63. The military began to become a professional institution independent of politics, with the newly created Military Academy graduating its first class in 1960. In October 1963, conservative military officers preempted constitutional elections and deposed Ramon Villeda Morales in a bloody coup. These officers exiled PLH members and governed under General Oswaldo López until 1970. In July 1969, El Salvador invaded Honduras in the Short Football War. Tensions in the aftermath of the conflict remain. Constituent Assembly, 1980. In 1982, the country returned to civilian rule. A Constituent Assembly was popularly elected in April 1980 and general elections were held in November 1981. A new constitution was approved in 1982 and the PLH government of Roberto Suazo assumed power. Roberto Suazo Cordova won the elections on an ambitious program of economic and social development to tackle the country's recession. During this time, Honduras also assisted the Contra guerrillas, President Suazo launched ambitious social and economic development projects sponsored by American Development Aid. Honduras became host to the largest Peace Corps mission in the world, and non-governmental and international voluntary agencies proliferated. From 1972 to 1983, Honduras was governed by military juntas. 1990s. In January 1990, Rafael Leonardo Collages won the presidential election and took office, concentrating on economic reform and reducing the deficit. He began a movement to place the military under civilian control and laid the groundwork for the creation of the Public Prosecution Service. In 1993, PLH candidate Carlos Roberto Reyno was elected with 56% of the vote against PNH contender Oswaldo Ramos Soto. He won on a platform calling for moral revolution and made active efforts to prosecute corruption and pursue those responsible for alleged human rights abuses in the 1980s. The Reyna administration successfully increased civilian control over the armed forces and transferred the national police from military to civilian authority. In 1996, Reyna named his own defense minister, breaking the precedent of accepting the nominee of the armed forces leadership. Honduras in the 21st century. In November 2001, the National Party won presidential and parliamentary elections. The PNH gained 61 seats in Congress and the PLH won 55. The PLH candidate Rafael Pinedo was defeated by the PNH candidate Ricardo Maduro, who took office in January 2002. Maduro administration emphasized stopping Mara growth, especially Mara 18 and Mara Salvatrucha. On 27 November 2005, the PLH candidate Manuel Zelaya beat the PNH candidate and current head of Congress Porfirio Pepe Lobo and became the new president on 27 January 2006. Ghost Manuel Zelaya Rosales of the Liberal Party of Honduras won 27 November 2005 presidential elections with less than a 4% margin of victory, the smallest margin ever in Honduran electoral history. Zelaya's campaign theme was citizen power, and he vowed to increase transparency and combat narco-trafficking while maintaining macroeconomic stability. The Liberal Party won 62 of the 128 congressional seats, just short of an absolute majority. 2010s. Inaugurated on 27 January 2010, Porfirio Pepe Lobo Sosa and his administration focused throughout the first year for foreign recognition of presidential legitimacy and Honduras' reinstitution in the OAS. Honduras became the only country in the world to ban the morning after pill in 2012. After the presidential period of Lobo Sosa, Juan Orlando Hernandez defeated Xiomara Castro, wife of ousted former President Manuel Zelaya, in the general elections in 2013. During the first years of his presidency, the economic growth helped to improve the infrastructure of the main cities. However, unemployment and social unrest increased during his first term. He opened the possibility of changing the constitution, enraging a considerable part of the population. In 2015, the Supreme Court of Honduras removed a single-term limit for the country's presidency. President Juan Orlando Hernandez was re-elected in 2017, winning the election through an alleged electoral fraud that produced constant protests and violence in the streets. In 2019, Juan Orlando Hernandez's younger brother, Juan Antonio "Tony" Hernandez, was brought to trial in New York for drug trafficking. He was convicted of all 4 charges against him, including drug trafficking and lying to authorities. 2020s. In September 2020, Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez announced that Honduras will relocate its embassy to Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Honduras became the 3rd country in the world after the United States and Guatemala to establish embassies to Israel in Jerusalem. In January 2021, Honduras changed the country's constitution to make it almost impossible to legalize abortion in the future. Before that, Honduras was already one of few countries with a complete ban on abortion. The constitutional reform was supported by Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez's ruling National Party. Please like this video, share and subscribe to our channel World History Explored for more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and until next time.